All right, good morning, everybody who's out there. I see we got a handful of people in here. Thanks for popping through this session, y'all. My name is Andy Bowe. I'm currently the band director at Living School, which is a new high school in New Orleans East. I spent the previous 8 years as the band director at Dolores T. Aaron Academy, which is an elementary and middle school in New Orleans East, right down the street. So I've been a band director in New Orleans, and again, specifically New Orleans East, for the last 9 years. And I've been teaching for 10 years. I was in St. Bernard Parish for 1 year before that. If we got any St. Bernard folks in the house, what's up? So my presentation this morning is about program building in Title I schools. If you teach in a Title I school, I hope that you'll come out of this with some very useful ideas and information. If you don't teach in a Title I school, I still believe you'll be able to come out of this with some useful ideas and some useful information. So real quick, the few of you that are in here live, I'd love to hear just real quick where you're from, where you teach, and whether or not you work in a Title I school. That'll help me know kind of the audience. Good morning, Doc. I see you there. And all of you who are watching this later on, I won't be able to hear from you directly, but I'm glad you decided to tune in. So before we can really get rolling in this presentation, we have to be on the same page about a few things. The first one is just, what are Title I schools? Okay, a Title I school, Title I was established in the mid-60s to provide additional federal funding to low-income schools. And so the way that the education system in the United States is set up, and the way that it was set up back in the day, was based largely on property taxes. Dr. Greg Robin, Performing Arts Academy Director, Title I High School, and a guitar instructor. Awesome. Thank you for being here, Dr. Robin. And so Title I was established in the mid-60s, around the same time as major civil rights movements. And the way that the education system was set up in the United States was that funding was largely based on local property taxes. So if you lived in an area with high property values and a lot of money, you had well-funded schools. If you lived in a low-income area, you had poorly funded schools. And so this kind of setup basically kept the rich rich and kept the poor poor. And we could go into all of the details about that. That's a whole conversation in and of itself, but that's sort of the overall context for how Title I came about. Title I schools are generally either in urban settings or very rural settings. It's very rare that you find Title I schools in the suburbs. You're either going to be way super rural or in the city. And Title I schools generally have high percentage students of color. So the school that I work at, just to give you all context, 99% of our students are students of color, and 95 of them come from low-income households. The previous school that I taught at, Dolores T. Aaron, it was also 99% students of color and 97% from low-income households. So that's sort of the context of what we're talking about with Title I schools here. Now, even if you don't teach at a Title I school, again, I think you'll be able to get some good ideas and useful information from this presentation. The next thing we need to be on the same page about is a deficit mindset versus a strength mindset. Now, this is normally the part of the presentation where I like to have some of our good actors read out some of these deficit mindset statements. Unfortunately, you just got to listen to me today. But the first one, which I'm sure we've all heard many times, is I hate bus duty. Many people hate bus duty. Now, with a deficit mindset, you're going to view that as a nuisance, as a problem every day. Whereas someone with a strength mindset will see the opportunity in that situation and say, bus duty is an opportunity to greet all my students at the start of the day. It's a time to get a glimpse of what sort of energy the kids are feeling in the morning, how they're feeling, what sort of energy they're bringing into the building. So another one, and this is based on a real student. No, her name is not Nora, but Nora never stops talking in class. She doesn't care about academics, or she doesn't care about music, right? And so someone with a strength mindset is going to look at Nora and say, well, she has great social skills. How can we leverage that to help her be successful, right? So rather than looking at the deficit in the situation, we're looking at what strengths not only our students, but even their families, our coworkers have to offer. And the last one here has been said to me more than once by well-meaning people. And they have said, oh, it's great that you have this band program, in the community you're working in and all. If a child's holding an instrument, they can't hold a gun. And now the stereotypes and the mindset that leads someone to believe if one of my students were to put down their instrument, the next thing they would reach for is a gun is very problematic. And we know that that's rooted in racism and classism. And so it's important for the purpose of this conversation today, and just for the purpose of our careers, to view music programs in Title I schools as an opportunity for our students to enrich their lives and their community, just like we would view it in any other school. Okay. And as I'm going here, I would love to have y'all pop into the chat. Good morning, Scotty. Good morning, Carolyn. Looking forward to spending some time with y'all this morning. Good morning, Trent. And if y'all have any questions, please feel free to drop questions anytime. All right, and the final thing that we need to just be on the same page about is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So if I could ask y'all real quick, give me like a 1 through 5 in the chat of how familiar you are with Maslow's hierarchy. So 1 is, this is the first time you're seeing it. 5 is like, I could write a dissertation on Maslow's hierarchy, okay? Just drop me a quick 1 through 5 in the chat so I know where we're all at. I probably would put myself around a 3 or 4. I'm familiar with it. I couldn't quite write a dissertation. But basically, Maslow came up with this. We got a bunch of 5s. Awesome. So Maslow basically came up with this theory that we have a pyramid of needs, right? And in order for the needs that are higher up on this pyramid to be met, the needs that are lower on the pyramid need to be met first. Okay. And so at the base of our pyramid is physiological needs, right? We all need air, water, food, or we're not going to make it. We need shelter, sleep, clothing. In a societal sense, we need reproduction, right? Then there's safety, not only personal security, but the other things that make us feel safe, okay? Once we have those needs met, we can start to meet our needs of love and belonging. And then comes esteem, and then at the top is self-actualization, desire to become the most that one can be, right? Well, as music educators, we're always pushing our kids towards self-actualization. That's always our goal. We want you to be the best flute player you could be, the best cellist you can be, the best soprano you can be, right? But sometimes we're pushing them towards self-actualization without necessarily acknowledging the needs lower on the pyramid that may not be met all the time. Okay, so we're going to loop back to this in a little bit here, but it's important that we think about all of the needs of our students beyond just their needs for music and their need for instruction. So I've taken the challenges that I've faced over my last 10 years really working in Title I schools and boiled it down to 4 major categories. The first one is the most obvious. Funding and resources are limited in Title I schools. Then we'll talk about competing for time. Then basic student needs, that's where we'll loop back to that Maslow's hierarchy. And finally, a lack of instructional support, which was one of the challenges that I didn't necessarily expect coming into the profession and into Title I schools. So starting off with funding and resources. Funds are often directed to what they call around here core content areas, right? And a lot of Title I schools are charter schools. Okay, in New Orleans, all of the public schools now are charters. And what's one of the many things that's different about a charter school is principals have an incredible amount of autonomy over where every dollar and cent goes. And so the tendency is to funnel all of that into core content areas. Another issue is that families often cannot purchase instruments and wants are hard to come by. Now, it's not saying zero, but there's not a lot of schools out there that are Title I and have 5-octave marimbas, right? I'd love to have a 5-octave marimba, but it's tough to get to those things that we really want, but can survive without, right? So we'll talk through a series of like, what would you do scenarios today? And this is where I'm going to really ask you all to utilize the chat. And so I'll read the scenario. I'll give you about a minute or 2 minutes to think about how you would handle that scenario, or perhaps how you've responded to that scenario in the past, because I know we have a lot of experienced educators in there. And then we'll talk about it. So first situation, you outline a detailed budget for the upcoming school year that includes justifications for every purchase. You've only included the bare necessities. After meeting with your principal, they tell you they'd love to support your program, but they don't have the funds to do so. What would you do? What do you do next? So please take a minute to think about that. Drop an answer in the chat. What's your next step after you have this meeting with your principal? They say, yeah, we'd love to help you out, but we can't do it. Sorry. All right, take a second to type those answers in the chat. Those of you who are watching this later on, who aren't on live with us right now, what I'd love for you to do is just take a minute to think about it and maybe jot some notes down for yourself, okay? And actually, while we're at it, I'm going to drop a link real quick into the chat. And if you would like, I've created a document where you can take notes on today's presentation, and it will have specific spots basically for each section. And I just realized that link might not be working, but let me try one more time. If you're on here live, give that a shot. Let me know if it works. We've got some great answers in the chat. Grants, community resources, and local leaders. Thank you, Dr. Greg Robin. Fundraisers all year long. Yep, Rachel. Trent said donations, grants, and fundraisers. Excellent. So here are a few of the ways that I've addressed this challenge in the past. Oh, and let me check on Scotty real quick. Conversation too often heard. I feel that, Scotty. Fortunately, continue to advocate and show what music does for the students to get them on your side. Love it. So with funding and resources, a lot of you said grants. Absolutely. Especially in Louisiana, we're fortunate to have a lot of really nice organizations and nonprofits whose aim is to preserve the musical culture of Louisiana. And so we have access to a lot of these grants. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Most schools or school districts have at least one person whose job is to apply for grants and to manage them. Find out who that person is. Make good friends with that person. At my last school, I made very good friends with the person who wrote the grants, and she was a tremendous help in getting my program off the ground. Now be careful, because at my new school, I did too well, and now I'm the grant guy, in addition to being the band director, because it's a small school and we're still growing. But don't be afraid to ask for help. Yes, fundraising and donation drives are really important. So fundraising, I'm sure we all have 20 different fundraisers that we've done in the past or thought of. Donation drives are something that we don't necessarily do as much. And what I've found, thank you, Rachel said, first link doesn't work, the second link works. Great. Y'all can click that second link on top. Thanks, Rachel. So what I've found is that donation drives have been just as effective as fundraisers. And so what I've done is I've put out the word through social media, through local, news networks, that sort of thing, that we needed instruments, right? And you'd be amazed how many people have their old trumpet that they haven't touched since high school, or they have their snare drum they got in middle school, right? Sitting in a closet, sitting in an attic at home, and are willing to donate those instruments. And at my last school, by the time I left there, right around half of our inventory was one-off donations like that, okay? And there's also professional musicians who still have their intermediate or beginner horn sitting at home collecting dust and are willing to donate it for the next generation. So donation drives have been awesome, and always frame everything in terms of the students. So if you approach a person or an organization and you say, I need more instruments for my band program so that I can teach these kids, right? They're not nearly as interested in helping you as if you go to them and say, hi, I'm the band director or orchestra director, choir director at such and such a school. My students don't currently have access to X, Y, and Z. They really need these resources to be able to access a quality music education. Can you help them? All right. By framing everything in terms of the students, people are much more likely to give. And always follow up with an attitude of gratitude. That phrase is like a little bit corny, but my mom just drilled it into my head growing up and it stuck. So every single donation that we receive to my program, the people receive a handwritten thank you note, at least from me, and often from the students as well. And what I realized is that when we did that, almost every single person who donated to my program donated again. And so following up and showing them the impact that their donations are having really encourages people to donate again. And then finally, this one is the only one I think that no one talked about yet. And that's what I call friends of the program. So friends of the program are folks who have resources to help your program and are invested in your kids and your program beyond just a business transaction. Okay. So I'm going to tell you all about a few of my favorite friends of the program in a minute. But first, I want you to think about some of the needs that you have in your program. Okay. And we all need money, right? We all need instruments. But I want you to think about some of the other needs. Most of us probably need dry cleaning, right? For uniforms. Most of us have transportation needs. We may have printing needs, right? If we have, for programs, for posters, flyers, things like that. So I want you to take a few minutes, think about some needs that you have, and then think about a potential friend of the program, a person or an organization who you could build a relationship with, who can help you with that need long term. Okay, not just a one-time thing. So please take a minute to do that. Drop a couple answers in the chat. All right. And then we'll move on. I'm going to set a timer over here for 2 minutes. So take a couple of notes and please feel free to type some things in the chat. Needs that you have and folks who may be able to help you meet them. Those of y'all who are watching this later on, who aren't with us live right now, hopefully you're doing this as well. Think of some needs you have and potential friends of the program. Those of you who are with me this morning, I'd love to hear some of your ideas in the chat. Got about 1 minute left that we're going to spend on this little brainstorm. About 30 more seconds, y'all. We already have some good ones in the chat. Rachel said a need is transportation for students who can't make it to rehearsals or concerts. Absolutely. New instruments, instrument repair. Yes, that's a big one. Dry cleaning, travel, entry fees, new music. And we've got some ideas. Families, administrators, community members, and businesses. Yes, indeed. And a potential friend, Rachel said, no idea, someone with a van. I like it. All right, so that's been 2 minutes. So those are all great ideas, right? Kevin says transportation, students who drive already. Yeah, they can be a big resource, or band parents who are invested. Excellent. So I'm going to share a few of my favorites, a few of the folks who have really helped my programs over the years. On the left there, you see me and my good buddy Rex Marshall, and let's call it 2 cups of juice, we'll say. And Rex is a really great bass player. I worked with him in some different bands here in New Orleans, but he's an even better live sound engineer. And so when I was putting on my first spring concert many years ago, I needed someone to help me run the live sound. And so I went to Rex and I said, look, man, I can't really pay you your normal rates. We're kind of tight. Can you help me out and do this concert? And so he did it for me and did it for a very good price. And he ended up having so much fun and enjoying the experience so much that he's done every single concert since, and at really, really good rates that make it easy for us to afford without putting too much burden on the program. So that's been tremendously helpful. The picture on the right, a beautiful classic from about 15 years ago. That's me in the middle. On the left is my good friend, Andrew Zapula. Andrew and I were good friends in undergrad and kind of went our own ways after we graduated. I landed in New Orleans teaching band. He was in Philly doing grad work at Temple. A few years later, he ends up getting a job at Tulane University. So he's down in New Orleans. and he's the percussion instructor over there. And what he does is whenever they have extra resources that they don't need anymore, he'll give me a call and say, hey, we got some extra bass drum mallets, we've got some heads, we've got some sticks, right, that we don't need, that's excess for us. And he'll donate that stuff to the program. And that has been a tremendous help and saved us a lot of money over the years. And on the right is my good friend Samaya Bilal. And Samaya's up in Baltimore. And a few years ago, I had never had a guest artist, or a guest conductor rather, for a concert. I was like, I really want to have a guest conductor for this concert, but I don't have $3,000 to fly somebody in and get them a hotel room and everything. And so I called Samaya. She's a great music educator. And I said, hey, would you be willing to come to New Orleans for a weekend, guest conduct on my spring concert? I can give you a couch and some really good food. And that's pretty much what I can do. And she did it. And it was awesome. And the kids had just as great an experience with her as they would have had if I had dropped a ton of money, you know, on a big name guest conductor. So keeping these people close can really make a big difference and gets them invested in your program. And the last one, this colorful, wonderful woman is Ashley Shabankare, who some of you might know. And Ashley used to work with the Preservation Hall Foundation. Now she's working with Trombley Shorty Foundation and a lot of other organizations here in New Orleans. But when I partnered with Preservation Hall Foundation many years ago, I made an effort to build a relationship with Ashley and with the Hall beyond just a one-time transaction of, hey, we need this thing, can you give us this thing, right? And so that partnership led to a lot of great opportunities down the line. And so just an emphasis on building that relationship in an authentic way paid dividends down the line. So I encourage y'all to think about some friends of the program, reach out to some people. You'll be amazed how many people love to help and how many great resources they have. So I'm looking at the clock and I think I better pick up the pace a little bit. The next common issue is competing for time. And this is one that we're all familiar with and we're probably all sick of. Okay. There's a lot of important things that need to happen in the school day, right? Math, ELA, science, social studies. There's got to be time for them. Counseling is a big one, especially in Title I schools where a lot of students have generational trauma that they're dealing with. Literacy, math, academic interventions, celebrations for students with good behavior or good grades, right? Math, lunch is important, got to happen at some point, right? Recess, ELA, even math, right? So we know we're competing for hours in the school day, minutes in the school day, with all these other things that need to happen. And I've found in Title I schools especially that competing for time can be really frustrating. So we're back to our next what would you do situation. And by the way, all of these what would you do situations are specific things that I've encountered in my teaching. Okay, so these are not hypothetical, they're very real. Names have been changed, of course, but otherwise it's the real deal. So this one, Mr. Mark shows up to your 7th grade band class and tells you he needs to pull 4 students for spring math interventions. You were not told that spring math interventions would be taking place during your class, and you were not provided a list of students in advance. What do you do? So again, if you are here, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the chat. What do you do in the moment? What do you do afterwards? Okay. If you're watching this later on, just take a moment to think about it and we'll have some ideas for you here as well. So I'm going to set a timer for 1 minute. Please drop something in the chat there. What would you do in this situation? I'm not disappearing. I just got to fill up my glass of water. My timer's running. Got about 30 seconds left. Mr. Mark is a teacher, Scotty. It's a good question. Mr. Mark is a teacher. And Rachel lifted up a really good point. In the moment, I would be as professional as possible, for sure. We all know what we would like to say to Mr. Mark in that moment, but we also probably all like our jobs and want to keep them. About 10 more seconds here. right. Cameron said, build a friend, not a foe in that moment. Love it. Love the way you put it as well. Discuss with the staff that schedules interventions without proper notice, lesson planning, and delivery is not effective. Very true. Very true. Kevin would allow the students to be pulled. Math is critical. However, talk with Mr. Mark later in the day and let him know that next time he needs to provide advance notice. Otherwise, he cannot ask them again. Finally, Cameron saying using technology to keep the students on track and engaged. Upload a video of what they missed. Yeah, that's all great stuff. So in the moment, what I personally would do in this situation and what I've done in the past, in the moment, I'm going to let those students go. And is that a problem? Yes. But you don't want students to see power struggles between adults, right? We don't need that to happen with students. That can happen later. We can have those conversations. So what I did in this moment, I'm going to let the students go, but then I'm going to talk to Mr. Mark later on, and I'm going to ask him, when was this schedule made? Who made the schedule, right? I'm going to come prepared with solutions of, hey, can you maybe take them 1 or 2 days a week? And how about if they're pulled from this other class on other days a week, right? So when it comes to this competing for time aspect, we have to justify why it's important for them to be in our class, right? And as music educators, that can be so frustrating because we know how important our classes are. We know why our students need to be there, but not everyone knows that. And so when you're justifying, sometimes you have to speak the language of whoever you're talking to. So when I'm talking to an administrator and I'm telling them why it's important for kids to be in my class, I'm leaning more on how it improves their attendance, how it improves their test scores, how it improves their social emotional well-being, right? I'm leaning more on those things. Whereas if I'm talking to another band director, of course, I'm talking about all the soft skills they're learning and how it prepares them for life and different things like that. Always in these situations, prepare solutions and alternatives. So if you come to Mr. Mark and say, you can't take those kids from my class, but you don't have any other ideas of maybe when that intervention can happen, he's going to shut down, right? He's not going to be interested in that. A little bit of compromise can go a long way. And as Cameron said, you want to build a friend, not a foe. So with Mr. Mark, you want to build a relationship with someone to where, okay, what you're doing is really important. What I'm doing is really important as well. So how do we compromise to make sure that most importantly, our students' needs are being met, okay? And then finally, never give up. I know I'm mostly talking to seasoned educators in here, so y'all have been in the fight for a long time. When I talk especially to younger people or music education students at universities, I just like to remind them, we have to never give up, because if we don't fight this fight, who will, right? All right, so that's competing for time. The next thing I want to talk about, and we're going to bring back Maslow's hierarchy, is basic student needs being met. Now, this is something that has some elements specific to Title I schools, but also some of these elements are just everywhere in every school, okay? So housing, food and water, security, and self-esteem are common things that I see students struggling with in my schools. Also, I'm getting a notice over here that my internet connection is low at the moment, so I'm on audio only mode. If y'all could still hear me, just let me know. My Wi-Fi is tripping sometimes here in New Orleans, so we're going to do 2 what would you do situations, all right? First one is a very, very common one. Alfred comes into class and assembles his instrument. He then sits with it in his lap and does not participate throughout warm-ups. He looks tired, but seems otherwise okay. What would you do? All right, thank you, Dr. Greg Robin. All right, so let's take about a minute here. What would you do in this situation? Student comes in, they put their instrument together, but they're not participating. They look tired, but they don't seem to be physically hurt in any way. What are you going to do? How are you going to approach that situation? Yeah, good. Mr. Walker and Dr. Robin both saying they'll talk to the student, find out what's going on either the day of or even find out what happened the night before to cause you to be tired, right? So the biggest thing with this, and a mistake that I made a lot early in my career, is I would get on Alfred from the podium. Sit up, play. You got to do what you got to do, push through, and I would get on him from the podium. And I made that mistake more than once early in my career, right? Ultimately, you want to find an opportunity to have a private conversation with them, okay? And yeah, absolutely, Scotty, let them know you care. You gotta have a private conversation with them and find out what's going on, find out why they're feeling the way they're feeling, and if there's anything you can do to help. Sometimes you can help, sometimes it's out of your control. But when you have that private conversation with them and also assume the best, you're at least giving them a chance and you're showing them that you care, absolutely. Let's look at this second one here. And again, this is a real situation that happened in my I think it was my third year teaching. You're lining up your class to transition back to their homeroom. As the last group leaves their seats, Callie nervously points to the floor. You see a large knife lying on the floor, and Callie quietly tells you it fell out of Chris's book bag. The class is calm, in line, and following directions. No one seems to notice. So what do you do in that situation? Okay, and again here, we're looking at student safety, right? One of those middle layers of the pyramid is safety. So what do you do in this situation? I got a timer running for about a minute. Got about 20 seconds left on the timer. Ready to say confiscate it as quickly and discreetly as possible. Yes, discretion is important here, especially given the fact that nobody other than Callie seemed to notice. Privately contact the school officer to come in. All right. It's my little timer making all that noise. Call attention to any students. Give that one to the counselors. All right. Yeah. So absolutely. A couple important things. Rachel, I love that you touched on being as quick and discreet as possible. You certainly don't want to point and scream, knife, right? So what I did in this situation, I happened to have a folder in my hands, and it was a big knife. It was the full size of the folder I was holding, but I picked it up, slipped it inside the folder. Nobody noticed, right? So I got the kids where they needed to go. And then the next thing, which is sort of along the lines of what Dr. Robbins said, is the next thing I did was went straight to my administration. Okay. You do not want to handle this in-house, right? Scotty, we're on the same wavelength, man. So definitely straight to your administration, okay? Or if there's, a school resource officer, a counselor, someone along those lines who can help with this situation, right? And because no one else noticed, I took all the kids back to class, including Chris, including Callie, all right? And went straight to the administration. As soon as we kind of got on the same page with the administration, we went and pulled Chris out of class, got his story, found out the situation. Why did he have it? Another thing, again, you don't want to make any assumptions, right? Because we could have assumed that Chris brought that to school to hurt somebody, right? But there's also a lot of other situations that could lead to that, right? He might have a dangerous walk home from school, all right? And he had it to protect himself. He might have had it for something else over the weekend, forgot, maybe he was out fishing with his dad or his uncles. And maybe it was in his book sack from the weekend and he forgot it was in there, right? There's a lot of different ways that things can happen. So we want to assume the best. All right. And then the other thing here is you also definitely want to follow up with Callie, right? Because in that moment, she might not have felt super safe, in the moment of seeing it on the floor. So you want to not only follow up with Chris, find out what's going on, if there's consequences that need to be administered, let your administration handle that, right? But you also need to follow up with Callie and make sure that you're helping meet her need for safety. Okay. So as few different things here as far as basic student needs being met. Housing is a big one in Title I schools. At any given moment, 10 to 14% of my students are experiencing homelessness. So it's really important to stay aware of resources for families and offer help whenever possible. And always, always have a good relationship with your school counselors and social workers. Those people are really tied in to what resources, are available and how they can help students and families. So make sure you connect students with those people. Food and water is a common need that's not always met for our students. Some kids in my school, they eat at school and that's it. They don't get to eat much outside school. And so whenever it's possible, if a kid is hungry and you have a granola bar in your book sack that you can part with, give it to them, right? Help whenever you can. But I found often just acknowledging, okay, I understand you're hungry because you didn't get to eat. I'm really sorry that you're experiencing that. Right now, there's nothing we can do about it. It's a little bit out of our control at the moment. So all I'm asking is that you give your best. All right. A little conversation like that is often enough to help pull a kid out of it and have them have a productive rehearsal. It still shows that you care. You're acknowledging and you're, what's the word I'm looking for? Acknowledging and affirming what they're feeling, but you're also still holding them to high expectations. Security is an important need. So we need to create safe and positive environments within our spaces. And as far as self-esteem, we're adults and most of us struggle with self-esteem at times, right? So we know our students are struggling with it. Build students up, and more importantly, teach students to build each other up, all right? Help students learn how to encourage one another. Encourage them to be supportive of their peers and not, cutthroat competitive with them, right? So there's a lot of ways that we can do those things to help meet those lower needs on the pyramid for our students so we can start pushing them towards self-actualization. All right, one more area that I want to talk about is a lack of instructional support. This was not something that I necessarily expected or saw coming when I started teaching in Title I schools, but what I realized is that I had almost no support over the last several years. One reason is there's no music specialist on campus, okay? In New Orleans, we have a variety of charter school networks, but we don't have a traditional district anymore. So there's not a district music supervisor, okay? And finally, any sort of instructional coaching or help is inconsistent or non-existent. So what would you do in this situation? Ms. Johnson is assigned to be your instructional coach. Let me read that. Great suggestions. We just don't know what our students experience outside our classroom. And often when they know you care, it makes all the difference in the world. Absolutely. Absolutely. So what would you do in this situation? Ms. Johnson is assigned to be your instructional coach for the school year. And if you don't have instructional coaches at your school per se, this is the person who needs to evaluate you, all right, and does your evaluations throughout the school year. You have one meeting to discuss your goals for the year, but she does not show up to observe you that week. 2 more weeks pass, and Ms. Johnson has not yet observed your class or provided any feedback. So what do you do in this situation? I'll get my timer going for a minute. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the chat. What do you do? Got about 30 seconds left on this one. Those of you watching live, I'd love to hear from you. Those of you watching later, I hope you're just thinking through this. What would you do in this situation? No one's observing you for your evaluations. No one's giving you any feedback how to be better at what you do. All right, there's our minute. So what I've done in this situation, and I have experienced this situation, at my last school, I was observed 1 time in 2 years. And so I'm looking at this like, how are these people evaluating my effectiveness? How are you determining if I'm good at my job or not when you've been in my band room once in 2 years, right? So definitely reach out to Ms. Johnson. Try and find out when you could reschedule any of those meetings or observations for sure. Thank you, Kevin. Rachel's had this happen to her. Yep. Didn't know what to do other than keep reaching out. Made you feel insignificant in the eyes of administration. Absolutely. It's, to be honest with you, situations like this and much worse than this are the reason that I left my last school, because it was clear through the amount of support I received, it was clear that music was just not a priority for my administrators. So the way that I generally handle this situation, one is to attend conferences. Sweet, check, we're here. This is great. This is an awesome conference today. There's NAFME, there's Midwest, there's other state MEAs, right? So attending conferences is a big way to keep growing. Reaching out to outside sources. So if there are colleges or universities nearby, or if you have relationships with colleagues in other school districts, ask them to come in and observe you one day and give you some feedback. All right. We can read. There's a million books out there. We all have the internet now, and we know everything on there is true, right? So you can read and finally build an instructional support system. We're going to sort of skip over this part now for the sake of time. But what I want y'all to do, I'm going to give you one little task that I encourage you to do after the presentation today. Think about some of your instructional needs and then resources who may be able to help. So instructional needs for me might look like, I'm not good at long-term planning. Okay, so I need someone to help me with that. Or it might be that I'm primarily a woodwind player and I need someone to help me out with brass mouthpieces, right? When do I move kids from this mouthpiece to that mouthpiece? So think about some of the needs that you have instructionally and think about resources, people you know, or resources you can use to fill those needs. And then I want you to call one of those people, all right? Today or whatever day you're watching this presentation, I want you to call one of those people and say, hey, I was just thinking, you have this set of knowledge that I don't necessarily have. I'd love if I could call on you when I need it to help me out with this, all right? So that's y'all's one little tiny task that I'd love for you to do, is think about some folks who can support you in areas that you need instructional support and reach out to those people, right? Now, finally, these are our 4 big areas, right, that we just talked about: funding and resources, competing for time, basic student needs being met, and instructional support. If you teach in a Title I school, you're familiar with these struggles. If you teach in any school, you're probably familiar with these struggles. So I hope it's kind of helped you come up with some ideas, some thoughts on how to approach these things. Now, finally, I think most of you have been teaching for years. But if there's any young teachers in here, you might be saying, why in the world would I teach in a Title I school? This sounds hard as heck. Well, because the people are awesome. Here's most of my band and half of one of my coworkers from a couple years ago. Because of students like Donovan on the left, who just brings so much joy into everything he does. Quinique on the right, who stole my phone in the parking lot one day and took 11 selfies before I realized she had it. These are the people who make teaching in Title I school and going through those challenges worth it. Students like my outstanding band members from the last concert we were able to have in person for 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade. All right. And just the pride that they had in winning those awards and putting on a great concert. All right. So there's a lot of reasons that fighting through these struggles is worth it. Now it's 11:46. So I guess I'm about a minute over. But if y'all have any questions, comments, if you just want to reach out and get in touch, I'd love to hear from you. My phone number is there. You're welcome to call, text anytime. And my email is there as well. Would love to hear from y'all anytime. So yeah, thank you to those of you who were here in person. I appreciate you being here. Those of you who are watching after the fact, I appreciate y'all watching as well. I hope it's been helpful, and I hope to hear from some of y'all.